I've really wanted to get out with the camera this weekend, although it's been a little bit of a struggle. I'm hoping too that you're able to understand me because I've been struck down with the dreaded man flu. I thought I'd come out for some fresh air. I thought coming out with the camera would be a great idea to make me feel a little bit better. So I've come down to my local woodland. Today's video, what is the best camera for landscape photography? Why, it's the one with you, of course. Let's walk and talk. So starting off, and the one camera we should all have in our arsenal is, of course, the mobile telephone device. For me, a mobile telephone device, in terms of the camera phone, is for scouting. For example, I was up in London, recently had to go up for a work meeting, and while I was crossing London Bridge, I noticed how foggy it was over the river, the Shard. The top of the Shard was illuminated in fog. The buildings over in the square mile, the same. You could barely see Canary Wharf in the distance. Would have looked a great image, even to capture on my phone probably. Unfortunately, I didn't have the time to stop and shoot anything. But in terms of days like that where I don't have the luxury of taking my mirrorless camera, my Canon RP with me, when I see a site like that, using your mobile phone is a brilliant example. And hell, it's not even the type of photography for that. It's its own art form in a way. And there are some amazing phone photographers. If you look everywhere on social media, they're not difficult to find. They can do wondrous things. For me, it's just nice to have the complete control. I don't feel when I take a phone picture that I've got complete control over what I'm taking. You just take the shot and that's it. Now, the subject we're walking towards at the moment is something that I've only ever been happy with capturing once. I've only got one decent composition of all the times I've been along here. And it's this mausoleum that you can potentially see over my shoulder. And it's interesting, it's a remarkable structure really. I think it's about 1800s. I think it was built by the person who owned this land. Now I'll put that original composition up on screen so you can see what I've captured in the past. Now what I'm thinking this time around is we've got some lovely dead brown ferns off in the distance. There's intertwining with some pathways which could act as some leading lines. So I'm hoping if I head over in that direction now, and you're not over to the right, I might be able to find something a little bit different to what I've been able to capture before. Before we talk about compositions for this subject we're here at today, I want to talk about the second type of camera you should think of getting, which is the DSLR, which is the mirrorless. I'm talking the interchangeable camera. I'm going to keep this brief because you know this type of camera is going to be the type I'm going to prefer over the mobile telephone device, over the point and shoot camera. Because for me, it's all about getting the settings right out on location. It's so rewarding when you get back, you see it all come together when you're reviewing that final image on Lightroom. It's about having total control over the settings, having total control over the image when you're editing it back home and you've got the raw image in front of you. All those little variables just add up in favour of this type of camera for me. It's the first composition that I've got for this mausoleum off in the distance. The path is leading its way off beyond the brown, the dead ferns in the distance. I've gone nice and low. I might still have to adjust the tripod a little bit just so I can get above this stick here that's kind of obstructing in the foreground. But ideally, I kind of want this nice brown, these nice brown ferns in the foreground. And then, of course, we'll have in the background the grassy path as it disappears towards, or as it appears, I should say, out towards the mausoleum itself. We've got a little bit of blue sky in the cloud now, meaning I might have to do a bit of an exposure bracket as well, just so I've got as much data to play with in both the highlights and the shadows, like I always want when I'm back home in Lightroom. I might have to take a couple of shots from this position too, because I love how there's this path, how the path starts its way just to the left here. We've got a couple of trees dotted to the left and to the right. So we've got a lot of elements to this scene. We don't want too much mess. We don't want this middle tree obstructing the mausoleum in the background. We don't want it obscuring it over on the left. So it's going to be a difficult one to get the balance right. So I think there'll be a couple of shots I'll have to test with, experiment with, get the right one, and hopefully I'll be able to share some of them now. The hardest question you've got to ask yourself is what camera is ideal for you? It really is a rabbit warren in terms of the camera technology that is out there, that is available to us now. Now, if you're making the step up from a phone camera or a point and shoot camera, my personal preference, what I would advise is get something secondhand. Get a nice cheap DSLR, nice cheap lens, nice way to start out, nice way to learn if you actually really want to get into the hobby without breaking the bank. Of course, when you want to make the step up, there are so many options available, all with camera technology advancing beyond the needs of the photographer themselves. For example, take image stabilization. You get stabilization these days in the lens. You get it as well in the camera. How long is it going to be before the technology is so advanced we can take 30-second long exposures handheld? We don't need to because we've got the tripod, but the way camera manufacturers are advancing the technology is something that's not needed, but I wouldn't be surprised if one day in the future it was made available to us. Now, you don't need a camera with image stabilization because you've got the option of tripods. Yes, they're cumbersome, they're annoying, especially when you want to move composition and you want to just use your feet rather than having to worry about the legs adjusting accordingly. Even worse when they break, really annoying when they break, let me tell you that. That is where image stabilization comes in handy. But is it really necessary? Do you really need it when you're going out to buy a camera for a landscape photography? Another example, high burst rates. Is that really a necessary example for this type of photography? It's nice and still out here. What are we shooting? There's a higher burst rate. The Canon RP, it's not the most ranked, it's not the most highly rated of cameras by Canon, but for me, it suits the purposes down to the ground. Yes, the dynamic range isn't perfect. That type of technology, that I can kind of understand in that regard where it could be a little bit better. But going back to higher burst rates, that's the sort of thing you want for wildlife photography, when you're shooting a cheetah as it flies across in front of your scene, a bird in flight maybe, or a Formula One car in terms of sports photography. Not needed for this, let me tell you that now, unless of course you want to mix your photography up, in which case you might want to think about the advanced technology options. Hell, it's even crazy, isn't it? There's that Sony camera out at the moment. It can shoot 1/80,000th of a second shutter speeds. Why would you need that? I can't think of an example why you'd need to freeze frame an image like that. It's what I mean by camera technology, by manufacturers. It's just advanced to the point beyond the needs of us. And it's frustrating in a way, because as a new photographer, if you're going out, if you're looking for all these kind of options that the cameras come with, it can be confusing, it can give you a headache. If you can, just keep it simple. Camera, tripod. How did we cope in the 80s and the 90s when the technology wasn't available? The likes of Ansel Adams, they were able to take magnificent photographs years ago. They didn't have image stabilization built in. They didn't have higher burst rates. So think about it. It wasn't needed then. Do you really need it now? So for our final composition I want to walk through today, I don't think I've ever been in a more precarious position than this one. I'm in a vertical shooting mode for a reason, because we've got this lovely tree, we've got this lovely green moss on the tree here in the foreground. The main aspect I wanted it in the foreground was this log, but I couldn't shoot the log without including this beautiful green moss, and hopefully it all leads to the mausoleum in the background. We've got a few hanging branches coming from the top of the shot, along with another branch which I might end up having to clone out in post. But because of where I am, this is a perfect shot that relies on focus stacking. Now, if you've not watched my focus stacking video, I'll put a link up on screen now. But I'm going to have to take 3 shots for this image. I'm going to have to focus firstly on the front of the tree. I'm going to have to focus then in the middle of the image, right at the end of the log. And then finally, I'll be shooting on the mausoleum. I'll have that focus nicely centered on the mausoleum itself. And for each of these 3 focused stacked shots, I'll be taking a further 3 shots for exposure bracketing, so I can get nice detail in the sky. We've got some lovely blues. We had a bit of a grey cloud, a real menacing grey cloud, but it seems to have disappeared now. So it's 9 shots all into one. If you're still with me, here's that shot now. I guess in the grand scheme of things, this is a very loaded question, because there's no right or wrong answer to what the best camera for landscape photography is. It all comes down to personal preference, what you're shooting, what your needs are, really. That's all it is. One thing that always makes me laugh though is when I post an image on socials and you get a comment on there saying, "Oh, what great images that is, what camera did you use?" In reality, the camera doesn't matter. The camera didn't go and scout that location. The camera didn't find that particular composition. All it did was capture the moment, froze time once you pressed the shutter button. It's not like, oh, what's the best paintbrush? Well, it's the artist. It's what the artist is able to achieve that matters. And in terms of photography, the most important piece of camera gear you can have is this, your eye. Because if you can see a shot, it doesn't matter what you use really. It doesn't matter if you use a phone camera, point and shoot camera, a DSLR, a mirrorless camera, a film camera back in the 1920s. If you can capture a brilliant shot, regardless of what you're using, then that is all that matters. And the most important thing is that you're happy with what it is you're capturing. Doesn't matter what other people think. And on that note, I'm off home. I could do with some paracetamol. I could do with a hot water bottle. I'll see you next time. That is me gone.